Hola, ahí delante, pero ¿qué quieres decir con eso? It's Terry Caliendo of Dedicated Managers, and that is the only Spanish I remember from high school. It was a play we did in class, and my job was to remember, of course it's me, but what are you talking about? Ahí delante, pero ¿qué quieres decir con eso? Good old days. All right, back to programming in English, I guess. So this is a quick update. This isn't even my final point of where I'm going to be at because it's still got issues, but I just wanted to show that I did figure out how to find out if we were at the end of the search and disable the previous and the next states. So if I'm looking at the database here again, remember my database only has five entities to it. And so as I go through them, I click the next state. That was 1 and 2. This is 3 and 4. And then, 5, 6. And, whoa, we got a lot now. I guess I've been playing around for a while. So it's got a whole bunch in there, but when it gets to the end, it grays out. And you can see that, the next button grays out so that I can't go any further and ruin my search. Whereas if you watched the previous video and you made it through the hour-long amazement that it was, you saw that if I could go too far and screw up my whole search. So this allows me to go forward and backwards, and when I get to the end of my search, I can't go any further. And so this is then the first entity. Pretty cool, but there's still some issues where, notice if I go forward and come back, well, let's start from the start case. Let's start from both fresh loads. These are these could be two different browsers, two different parts of the world, same computer, whatever. They have two different connections to the database, but they're live updating each other. Now, we're here at the beginning of the search, and we're looking at the newest created entity. So if I go and create a new entity, so if I click Add New Client, it's going to load. There's some issues there, but ultimately it's going to load that new client, and you see it pops up here real time as I put the name in. And if I maybe put in Little Miss, sure. That's not even right. Little Miss. I could spend an hour on this. So you see it's live and it updates it. And that's at the beginning of the the search. Now the way I have things set up though, if I start over from scratch again, so we start from that same state that I was at before. Whoops, I want to go back to the dashboard here. So let's do this again and just make sure that we're at the same state. Reload, fresh load. If I click next and now I click back, the way I have my program set up, I am now looking backwards. My last search was a backwards looking search. So let me show what that means as far as the front end. So I'll go and add a new client. And you'll see that when I add, let's do Bob Vila, everybody's favorite homemaker from the home builder from the 80s. It doesn't show up there, and nor do I find out that it exists until I go forward. And now if I click previous, I can actually get back to that state. But it didn't show up right away the same as it did when we were in a forward-looking search. So the way my searches work, the way they currently work, let me try and pull this back on screen and see if I can make this bigger. If these are the representation of the objects, it's some object. Each one of these is some object with an ID 001 and then maybe some data, first name, Bob, that type of stuff. Each one of these is I'm just representing these objects. I'm just representing this type of object with just a simple showing its ID. So if we get rid of that, and we're just kind of looking at the ID and talking about the search and the order by. If we were searching for, by the ID and ordering by the ID, ascending in this case, if my search is returning, say, these three, and it's a forward-looking search, that means I'm starting after 1, and I'm telling the search to start after 1 and then show me a limit of 3. And so that's what gets into, when we look in the code here, you know, this start after stuff that I'm doing in the code. What that's saying is, this is the node that I'm looking at. This is the cursor, I think they call it, the search cursor or query cursor. This is that point that I'm looking at. Start after that and then give me a limit of 3 in my search. And here I'm searching for by ID and order ascending. You know, a start at would say start here and then give me the next 3. That would be a forward-looking search. Now, to paginate backwards, I have to actually, what I do is when I set up the search, I reverse the search so that it's 006, 005, 004, 003, 002, 001, so that we are, it's still, because Firebase only does forward-looking searches, but I'm fooling into looking backwards. I'm fooling my pagination data to look backwards by reversing the data. So, you know, that's taken by, when I click next, I'm doing a forward search in the order that the person's expecting. When I do a previous click, I actually reverse the data, and then I do a forward-looking search on that reversed data and get my entities. And then before I display it to the user, I just do an array flip or an array reverse on this and then display it to the user so that it's shown in the order that they expect, where the 2 would be, you know, I would have this search, but the user would be seeing this 2, 3, 4. And so I can show that real quick in the code. Let's see, where do I do that? I do here if it's backwards. So when I come through and I'm doing my order by, if it's a backwards looking search, the paginate direction is backwards, and that's set when the user clicks previous. They are actually clicking, if we look at the entity, this is that button in code. So there's the previous that they're clicking on. So it calls paginate with the backwards keyword, or the backwards, what is that? It's when we send something, it's a, is it a parameter or an argument? I think it's an argument when we send it. And then, so what is that paginate? Paginate is here. It receives the direction. It throws it in this search params direction variable. There's this search direction property on the search params variable, and then sends that. Here's that search params. It sends that to the get root entity store function, asynchronous function. That's what dispatch is. So we are here. This is within the get root entity again. And so as we go through this, I've gone through all this in the other video. I won't bore you with it again. But when we get to the order by, if we are, that variable that I just talked about, if it's set to backwards, which means everything I just talked about, the you know, the previous button was clicked, and so we've set the pagination direction to backwards, I am actually going to take my query, and my search params is what I originally sent in, my order by direction string. If it's equal to descending, I'm going to flip it to ascending. So I'm actually going to do it my order by in the reverse of what the person is expecting. So originally, again, if you go back to the other video, this is my dashboard where I set up the parameters for my search. This is the object that I send in that defines my search. And here the order by is descending because I want the newest the newest entities to be at the top. We're looking at the newestly created entities. We want them to be at the top. So my user is expecting to see the order being, you know, from newest to oldest. But here, when I'm doing a back search, of clicking the back button, I need to reverse the search from ascending to descending. I need to do the opposite of what they're expecting. I'm not going to display that to them. but in order to search backwards, Firebase does not give you a way to say, hey, you know, start from this point and look backwards. It only gives you a thing that lets you say, you know, Firebase only lets you say, give me this point and look forward. I can't say, give me this point and look backwards and give me the results backwards. They don't have that functionality. So again, I reverse the array, and now I can say, here's that point, look forward. And so I'm actually looking backwards in the way the other person is expecting to see it. So again, that's what I'm doing there. So if we're going backwards, we flip the order by in the search so that we're effectively looking backwards. And then if it's not backwards, then we're looking forward. And so I actually do, if the direction they want to look is descending, then I make it descending. And hopefully you know what this is right here. This is a ternary expression where if whatever you're checking, if the thing you're checking here, if this thing is true, then this is the value that's returned. If this thing, geez, sorry for that jumping around. If, programming. Let's try it again. At least I got it somewhat highlighted. If this thing here is false, then return the other value. So in this one, I'm just doing a default thing where if it's not descending, then it should be an ascending search, which would mean that the default is to be ascending, because if this is not defined, it's going to be false. And so we'll have an ascending search, which is the default on Firebase anyway. So anyway, you know, backward search reverses the order by, if I haven't hammered that home. So when we're doing a backward search, I'll say it one more time, I guess. We're not doing this search where we're picking a point and looking forward. We're reversing the search. We're picking a point. We're still looking forward, but effectively we're looking back on what the user is expecting to see. And then the other thing I needed to talk about was the start after. There is no, you know, there is a start before, and I talked about this in the last video, or I came across it, and it turned out not to be helpful. So if I look up Firestore start before, no, end before, I came across this. Is this it? No, that's not it. Let's do this the right way. Let's go to the reference section. Let's find find the JavaScript, Firestore, query. That's what we're receiving back as a query or a collection reference. But query has the. Did I pass it? Let me just do a search end at. Here it is over here. If I'd learned to use this thing. So here's the end at, which you would think would say, hey, I want my search to end at a certain place. And then if I was to set a limit, you would think it would give me the 10 before that. So the way I read this initially was that if this is my search here, if I said end at 4, you know, if I gave it the document, this is the dot location where I want you to end, and, you know, end there, and the limit was, say, 2, you would think it would give me these 2, but that's not what it is. What end at does is basically acts in the forward direction, where, say, my search was at the start at was 2, and I had a limit of 6, or a limit of, say, 4, so it would start at 2 and give me 1, 2, 3, 4. I could also put a limit on there and say, but if you come across document 004, end at 004. So I think that's the way to interpret that end at. The end at does not help you do any backwards looking pagination stuff. So that kind of fell out the window. So anyway, back to where I was. What was I talking about? I was talking about the start after, I think. So, you know, if I'm in the forward direction, I start after the last thing it found. If I'm in the backwards direction, this should actually be called first root entity. That's just a variable name thing because I'm actually pulling I'm not going to get into that right now. I kind of did in the last video. So I think I've hammered this home that the searches are reverse the direction and then look forward on a backwards pagination. So how do I determine when I get to the end? Well, what I'm doing now is wrong, but it's working, and it's actually an interesting thing. So the on snapshot, it returns my, the query snapshot, which has all the results. So this query snapshot thing effectively has, my results of my search. So if I said start after 1 and give me the next 4, this would be my search results. These would be the individual documents for that search result. And what I do is I take that object that they give me, and that's what this for each does, is it goes over that array of information and takes each document. So this doc in this for each loop is effectively each one of these, so I'm getting the information before when I drew the object out. I'm going through that search result and getting the document information on each one and tying it to something for me to use later. I won't get too in depth into that right now. I kind of did in the last video. But anyway, so along with that query snapshot, because I was looking at the documentation, you can also get off of that query snapshot, you can get the original query, which is interesting. So if we look at a query snapshot in the reference section, you can ask it for the query. So the query you called on the snapshot. And that is an actual query object, which means I can do things on it that I would do on a query object. So here's a query object right here. What can I do on a query object? Well, I can do another search. I can do an end before, all that stuff we talked about. I can do a limit, and I can do a, order by, that kind of stuff. I don't know if I can change the order by, but I played around and I can change the start after and the limit. So what I'm doing to find out if I'm at the end of the array, I'm actually taking my previous query and I am starting after the page forward document, which is the last document in the array that was returned. So if we were to go back and look at it like this, if this was my query and it returned these 4 results, what I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, give me this last query cursor here and put it into a start at of another search. So I'm taking this point here and I'm putting it right there in the start after of that original query. So I'm taking my original query that I used to even get here. I'm changing my start after point to be the last point of my search. I'm doing a limit of 1 and saying, hey, go and get that. Whoops, I do that all the time. Hey, go and get that, and then do some work on it. And ultimately, if I go and get it and it returns it's an asynchronous. It goes out and gets the information, then it comes back with a then function when it's done, a promise, and it gives us another query snapshot. So I called this one subquery snapshot. And if I say if that's empty, that's something we can check on a query snapshot. If we take a look at the documentation and we look at a query snapshot, we can ask it if it's empty. And it's true if there's no documents in the query, so it didn't find anything. Well, that means we're at the end of our search. So if we're searching backwards, then I want to disable my previous set my flag to disable the previous button to true. And if we're on a forward search, which means we're not on a backward search, then I want to disable the next button in the next button I want to disable. So what's happening is in here, if we're looking at a forward search, if we said start after 2 and give me the next 4 documents, give me a limit of 4, it's going to give me these 4. So then I'm taking this last one, I'm running it through that same query again, but starting at this point and saying, give me the next the next entity, but there is none. So it returns an empty array, or it returns this query snapshot.empty is true because there's nothing after that point. So that the search doesn't fail, it just returns an empty snapshot. And so I'm not in the backwards direction, I'm on the forwards direction in that case. So I'm going to disable my next button, and that flag shows up in the actual interface. That's where this shows up ultimately. The well, we were talking about the next button, disable next button. The V button. This is Vuetify. I have the ability to disable a button by sending it a true or a false. So that's where I hate it when it jumps around. Sorry about that. So I'm sending it, true or false here, whether or not to disable it. And so we're saying disable it with true here. And so ultimately on the user interface, when we get to the end, well, that's a forward. So let's do a forward looking. So there, we've come to the end. So I've done this search. I've asked it to look one past Bob Jones. There's no more after Bob Jones. So it returned an empty array. And so I knew to turn off set that flag and turn off that button. So, and then the opposite is true in the backwards direction. I just do a similar thing in the backwards direction where if I get to the end in the backwards direction, there's no more after this guy, so disable the previous button. And the way that works is when I have, if I'm doing a backwards search and I'm saying, hey, start at 5, give me the next 4 limit of 4, then go one further. I do that same thing. You'll see in the code, it's no different. I do the same look. Nope, that's not it. Where is my, here, this same query snapshot. There's no if statement around this, whether it's forward or backwards, because at this point we're doing the same thing. We're taking a query and we're searching in a direction. Just the order by is different, which it doesn't matter as far as that's concerned at this point. So again, if I'm starting here and I say give me the next 4 documents, then I receive those 4. I take a look at this last one and say, hey, get me the next one, and that doesn't come back. Same as here. If I said look at 2 and give me the next 4 documents and look one further, there's nothing there. So that's what's happening in this functionality here. I'm saying just go one more doc forward. And tell me if there's anything there. If there's not, disable those buttons. Interestingly, this is a little bit of just programming technique. This is some ES6 functionality where I'm giving it a function to call back. This is an asynchronous call, right? When I go and get this, anytime you see a then, you've got an asynchronous call. Well, I'm setting this disable stuff. I'm setting it, and if this is asynchronous, this may not come back until after some of this stuff has finished. And so I actually, if we look at the disable button here, that gets put in this object, which gets sent to storage, committed to storage. So I may not get this result back. This may not come back until after this commit has happened. So I actually had to send to where I'm receiving my snapshot. If you put this keyword async in front of a function, it now gives you some ability to control asynchronous calls within the function, and that's why I have this little await here before doing this asynchronous call within my asynchronous return call. It says, hey, in my program flow, now that we're inside what we're calling an asynchronous function, don't run this stuff down here until this promise is returned. So await for this to get finished before moving forward in this code. So it is. I'm not sure if it's blocking. Where if this stalled, I don't think my interface would hang. I just think that this code wouldn't run until that finishes, but the other code will continue to run. And JavaScript is single-threaded, but it fakes being multi-threaded. So I don't think it locks up the front end if this fails. But anyway, I am going to ultimately get rid of this because what I'm doing here is kind of silly. You know, I'm taking a search. I realize there's an optimization here. If I say start here, or start after 1 and give me the next 4, and then I go and take 5 and say give me the next one, well, why don't I just start here and say give me the next 5, and then I'll show the user the 4, and then I'll just detect within that search whether the that last one came through. So that's my next functionality, is to actually, instead of doing this call again, which it's pretty cool that I found, I can take that same query and extend it. Something to learn, but not necessary in this case. What I should do is just where I set my limit, I should do a limit +1, and then look at my results based on that +1, and see if that +1 is there when the results come back. So I'll show that in another video how I tackle that. But I think that's going to be the solution to my problem, because again, I've been talking so long again. How long have I been talking here? 26 minutes. Wow, amazing. So I actually did show that where you know, the case where I was in the backwards direction, where I came in from the backwards direction, and then I added you know, I added another entity to the beginning, and it didn't show up here. That's because this look within, I'm doing a static get here. It's a one-time look. So if that changes and suddenly another object does show up, it doesn't get this search is a one-time thing. I could put an on snapshot here and then store that search and do updates, but it's going to be cleaner, I think, to just take this original snapshot and go one further. So again, that's probably very confusing. So I'll talk about that in another video. Hopefully it'll become more clear then if it ends up working out and I do show it. So anyway, Terry Caliendo, Dedicated Managers, just wanted to show that I do have some rudimentary pagination working and how I did it. Hopefully it was somewhat understandable, that if nothing else, maybe you learned a little ES6 functionality about that async thing. And maybe even saw a little bit in the documentation again. So again, Terry Caliendo, Dedicated Managers. Feel free to contact me at dedicatedmanagers.com. Would love to collaborate. Always looking for you know, more people to help. Take care. Have a great day, and happy coding.